this afternoon. We love to see your faces and we love to see your names and we love to see where you work or where you are coming to us from. So if you want to, share that information, you can do that. Let's see just to give you guys an update, our next connection call, which is for members only, will be February 13th at 9 a.m. So for those who are new to that, it's a time where we just share intel, problems, questions, kind of like what we've just been doing for 15 minutes, just helping each other out, getting some information. It's a really supportive atmosphere, and I know it's really been helpful for me in the past. So join us if you can. If you're not a GPLH member, but want to become one and paid for this event, we would be happy to apply that fee to your annual membership. So use coupon code SAVE30. And Deb's just going to put that in the chat there. Soon after Tonia is finished today, we will distribute the recording. And I know she's got some great handouts that she's already sent me, so I'll include those. I also always include a very brief survey. It's only 5 questions, so if you have the time, I really appreciate any responses to that. Please do mute yourself while Tonia is speaking until the end when we have a Q&A, and then unmute yourself and feel free to ask your questions. If you want to put your questions in the chat, that's okay too. We can monitor that. So welcome to No Unsolicited Proposals, how to get that date to the grant prom. Love that. I'm so thrilled to introduce today's presenter. Tonia Brown-Kinzel began her career in philanthropy in 1999. As my sons would say, she's from the 1900s. No offense, Tonia.
Yeah.
She's worked for both grant seekers and grant makers, as well as having served as a grant reviewer. That unique combination of experience yields special insights that have earned nearly $20 million in funding for nonprofit organizations and government agencies over the course of her career. Tonia has been selected as a 40 under 40, so she's a leader in the Greater Fort Wayne Business Journal, and is a graduate of Leadership for Fort Wayne, an elite leadership training program. She is currently the grant compliance manager at the Grant Plant, where she loves working with clients to advance their grant portfolios and ensure compliant grant management, everything that we need. Welcome, Tonia, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. Take it over.
Thank you very much. That was a very flattering introduction. I appreciate it. Let me share my screen and make sure everybody can see what I've got up here. Everybody can see it. Can I get some thumbs ups? All right, good. So let's see if I can get into presenter view, if it'll let me. All right, hang on a second. I'm gonna exit out of here. See, we set this up 15 minutes early and now we're having challenges, of course. Best laid plans, right? Nope. Hang on a second. Okay, there we go. Can everybody see that now? All right, sorry about that. So as the introduction held, I have been doing grant writing since what somebody said the last century, and then somebody else corrected the last millennium. That's how old I am. But I didn't always do grant writing or grant compliance work. I started, as I mentioned, doing like a $250 grant, and I thought, oh, this is easy because I got my first one, and of course thought, I can do this, and then found out through many years of experience that it's not always quite so easy. You're not always going to have beginner's luck. And a lot of times the ability to get your grants is not only how well your program is designed and how well you articulate it, but also about the relationships that you build. And so that's a lot about what we will discuss today. So, I work for the Grant Plant. I just want to do a quick overview because I have a lot of people asking about that. The Grant Plant is a national grants consultancy firm that is based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but we have clients that are all over the place. And I actually live in Dayton, Ohio currently. We have 21 years of experience, and I think the last I heard it was like over, oh, there it is, $304 million raised. Just a phenomenal group of people that I work with. And so we do full cycle grant services, anything from prospecting to find the grants, to developing your grants calendar, to writing or assisting you writing your grants. And then as was mentioned, my role is in making sure that you comply with all of your grant requirements, both for regular public sector grants as well as private sector grants. So today's webinar hopefully will be a little bit fun and a little bit different than you are all used to. I want a little bit of interactivity, and you can feel free to just throw your answers into the chat. I'm sorry? Okay, so you can go ahead and throw your answers into the chat, but what I'm going to do for each of these slides is I'm going to put up a still or a screenshot of various movies that have to do with proms, or in some cases homecoming or spring dances, right? Just to have a little bit of fun as we sort of talk about the themes of how to get, hopefully, an invitation to submit a proposal to a foundation or a funder that doesn't always accept or maybe never accepts competitive proposals. So as you can see right here, there is a screenshot of a movie. So go ahead and throw in the chat if you know what the name of the movie is. And again, a little bit of a fun here. All of these movies were made in my lifetime. So hopefully nobody will say that these are too old and they don't know what any of them are. So this particular movie is from Love and Basketball, 2000. One of my favorite movies, very, very good movie. So let's get into the discussion of what happens. We've all been there, womp womp, right? We are hearing about this funder, or we're hearing about an initiative. We think, oh my goodness, that is so well aligned with what we do. This funder sounds like they're perfect for us to either have a conversation with or submit something to, or in some cases, we don't know a lot about them, but they're giving out a lot of money. And so, of course, that piques our interest and it perks up our ears a little bit. And so we start looking for more information, and invariably we either get the news from a coworker, a peer, a colleague, or we find on their website that they do not accept unsolicited proposals. But I don't want you to despair, because not all is necessarily lost. There are going to be some cases in which the funders just absolutely are not going to be open to you. They know what they want to fund. They have their favorites, or they have their very specific sort of marching orders. But my experience is a lot of times the funders themselves are in fact interested in maybe exploring, but they are a little bit guarded. And so what I'd love to do, we're actually gonna do a quick poll. When you see no unsolicited proposals on a funder's website or other communication materials, what do? Do you smack your forehead and mutter some four-letter words and cursing your bad luck? Do you ask your colleagues if they've had any luck with the funder and for any tips that they might have? Do you throw caution in the wind and just send your proposal to them anyways? Or do you try to figure out some other angle in which you might be able to engage with the funder? So go ahead and throw A, B, C, or D in the chat. And we'll see what you got. Okay, we see D, B, some D's and B's, right? And I would say I certainly have done all four of these at different times, right? And I think B and D are probably your best answers to sort of move forward with things, to see how you might be able to proceed. And we will discuss a little bit more, hopefully throughout these tips, ways to do that. So now I want to, I gotta get out of the chat, go to my next poll. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident do you all feel about the possibility of building relationships with funders who declare no unsolicited proposals? And let's say 1 is the least amount of confidence and 10 is supreme. You've got the most confidence about doing that. Okay, so I see some 1s and 3s, a couple of 6s. That's great. Some 4s and 5s. Okay. All right, so that's good. Hopefully we will see these numbers increase. I'm going to pull you at the end of things, right? Go ahead, if you haven't already typed it in there, put in your answer. So the next question, or the next topic I just want to discuss really quickly, are the learning objectives that we hopefully will achieve through this presentation. The first thing that I hope to do is to help you learn how to research about foundations and funders and their past giving, how to identify what their areas of interest are, and how to explore whether or not your organization or agency is in alignment or really could be a match for the funding sources that you think that you're interested in. We're also going to talk about some methods and strategies to appropriately cultivate new relationships with funders, and also talk about how to hopefully learn more about their funding, resources, and community investments. And hopefully you will learn and develop some skills and practices that will raise the level of your professionalism as grant professionals. So this is the next one, the next movie we've got. Go ahead and throw it in. It is one of our older movies. And while you're typing in your answers, I want to make sure that everybody understands that in this particular session, we are not going to be talking about how to find funding opportunities or funders. This session is not about prospecting. This session is with the assumption that you have identified a specific funder or funding opportunity that you have heard about others receiving, and you're interested in trying to figure out how to angle in there to potentially get an invitation. So we've got some people that are answering. Carrie, you've got it. Yep. So let's move to the next one. So first I want to break some bad news. I'm a break me the bad news before we get to the good news, and I promise we will get to the good news. But about 3 out of every 4 foundations state that they do not accept unsolicited proposals. So according to Foundation Source, there are 127,000 foundations in the United States alone. So that means only about 32,000 foundations are even willing to accept your proposal. There was also a 2009 Foundation Source survey, and Foundation Source is a company that provides administration to about 1,200 private foundations that helps them sort of with technical assistance and capacity building. And so they surveyed their private foundation clients, and of their clients, 77% said that they would not accept unsolicited requests. So this information is about 15 years old, but the other statistic that I have here on the slide is from Brad Smith, who is the president of Candid, which used to be GuideStar and Foundation Center for those of you that are familiar with it. And that was just from 2021. So it's been pretty consistent that about 3 out of 4 are not going to accept your proposal no matter what. But now we've got some goodish news, right? Of the 1,263 foundations that have been identified as having $100 million in assets, 711 or 57% state that they are willing to accept unsolicited proposals. So that's great. A lot of the times, the ones that aren't willing to accept unsolicited proposals have very little in assets. And so it may not be worth it for you to invest a lot of time to get perhaps a smaller return. Okay, I'm not poo-pooing, obviously, the smaller grants. We were talking about that earlier, but you may want to assess, is this really going to be worth the amount of time that we've got to put in with our limited resources to write and receive grants? So I'm going to invite you all to throw in the chat reasons why various foundations on what their various motivations might be that they do not accept unsolicited proposals. Why might a foundation not have an open competition for proposals? So it's FYI, we can see your notes. Control over volume. Yep. Okay. Thank you for telling me you can see my notes. Let's see. As you go ahead and type that in. Okay. Don't have the resources to review many proposals, staffing, not enough staffing, human resources to accommodate all the requests, etc. Right. Yeah. So that is very much in the vein of what I have discovered with things. So a funder may have limited capacity to respond to what might otherwise be a flood of applications. A funder may desire, as we discussed with some of the Mackenzie Scott conversation earlier, to either pre-screen or vet prospective applicants in a pressure-free environment, or they may want to avoid getting your hopes up before they're willing to even really entertain a true conversation with things. A funder may prefer to do their own due diligence in researching the background and capacity of a prospective grantee rather than having the organization sort of present their case. And I've heard a couple of funders who've actually attended my trainings in the past on this topic say that a lot of times they feel like a proposal is sort of your best foot forward, and it's better for them, they feel, to talk to other funders and talk to the people in the communities that they serve about who's really doing the good work, even if they don't have, a fantastic development team that can write really, big, wonderful applications. A funder may also have limited time to deploy funds. So we did actually see this a lot during COVID or during other exigent circumstances or emergency circumstances. They might just be like, we're just throwing that out there. And there's not a lot, unfortunately, you can do about that other than just making sure that the funders are aware of your services. And a funder just may want to make decisions at their own discretion and not use a rubric. They just may want to use their whim, and that is their right and prerogative, right? So now we're in our next movie screen or movie still. So go ahead and throw that in the chat. And I am going to go ahead and advance here looking for answers. Does anybody remember this one? No answers? All right, I'll tell you again, one of my favorites. Wedding Singer, you're close. Never Been Kissed. Yep. 1999. So, all right. I just changed it back to my presenter view. Can you all see my notes or not? You're gonna have to throw it in the chat. Yes, no? No notes. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. So, tip number one, and this is really the answer that I will give to almost everybody, but it kind of freaks people out and makes people very nervous because a lot of grant writers tend to be introverts. And a lot of people, whether you're an introvert or not, do not like the idea of rejection. And sometimes face-to-face or phone call to phone call or Zoom to Zoom rejection is not a favorable thing, but I want you to not feel awkward about this because most program officers, if they are publicly listed in some way, whether they have their name on a website or some kind of materials, if you see a program officer or executive director who is listed in association with a foundation, it is acceptable to contact them and call, or better yet, write them to get more information. No unsolicited proposals, does not mean no unsolicited inquiries. So sometimes program officers simply want to just have conversations with you to vet your ideas and kind of say, yeah, that might work, or no, we've tried that, we're not really interested, or that's outside of our funding priorities. So I highly recommend that you take an opportunity to just reach out to them to say, hey, this is who we are. This is what we're about. We are seeking funding for either this program, service, or initiative. Does this sound like something that you're interested in? And if so, what might be the next steps for you? Would you love to do a site visit? Would you love to have a meeting? Would you like us to put in perhaps a letter of intent or a letter of interest? So I have found, but by and large, out of all these tips, this is my single most effective tip, and in my opinion, is the best way to really start developing relationships. And developing relationships, as you will see thematically throughout all the tips that I'm going to give you, is really the best way to get that invitation to the grant prom, right? So in a 2015 Foundation Source survey, 57% of those funders said that they much prefer email inquiries over phone inquiries, but their second favorite way to receive inquiries was from snail mail, which was 26%, and only 9% said they wanted to be contacted in person. So, all right, next movie. Go ahead and throw it in the chat. Who or what is this? Lisa says, are you saying that writing is better than calling? No, the opposite. I apologize. Yes, it is better to email, and then next is phone call, and then next is snail mail. Yep, Napoleon Dynamite, you're right. So tip number 2, use your network. I'm going to invite you to cultivate relationships throughout your community and your sector, and then position your organization to ultimately be invited to submit funding proposals. So what is your network, right? Your network is your staff, your board members, your volunteers, if you have volunteers, even your donors, and perhaps other community leaders and stakeholders or colleagues that you otherwise would talk to. And more than likely, if this is a sort of regional or local foundation, you're going to have somebody that knows somebody related to the foundation itself. So, in a report entitled Donor Loyalty Study, a deep dive into donor behaviors and attitudes, which was published in 2016, the authors cited that there are three main me motivations, ME, for donors. The first was, I am passionate about the cause. The second was the organization and I have some kind of relationship and they depend on me. They depend on our foundation. And the third is I know someone that is affected by the cause. And so therefore it impacts me, right? Those are the three me motivators. So other than those three me motivators, which tend to be the motivations that will motivate a foundation the most, the next highest motivator for a foundation to consider funding in a particular sector or funding a particular thing is that they have been directly asked to donate. And you find this true whether you're in grants or not, right? If you're just doing a major gift, if you don't ask them, if you don't invite someone, if you don't educate them about your organization, you're never going to get that connection. So you obviously don't go to a foundation and you immediately make that ask, but you do need to go and introduce yourselves, maybe see if they're open to some conversations. And then eventually, once you make those inroads, then you can get to the point where you can make that ask. So, next movie. I just watched this one with my 6-year-old son, and he was not as enamored as I thought he would be, but I think he didn't really understand a lot of the pop references that were being made. So we'll have to revisit that one in the future. Back to the Future. Yep, correct. So 60%, as we talked about sort of in our why a foundation might not give, why a foundation might not give, sorry a second. Oh my goodness, I am having the darndest time today. Sorry. Why a foundation might not give. 60% of US foundations are family foundations with zero to little support staff. And on top of that, 92% of US foundations do not have a website, right? So how are you supposed to use your network to find these foundations and who's associated with them, whether they're staff or board members, if they don't even have a website, right? So I want to invite you to use a free tool that's available to you. And that is GuideStar. The only thing you do need to do is create an account, but there's no fee to this, right? So once you go to GuideStar and you log into your account, you will then just simply go and type the name of the foundation that you're interested in, right where that red arrow is. And then this is not a foundation that says no unsolicited proposals. It's actually one that serves with all kinds of competitive proposals. But I just wanted to use them as an example. So I pulled up the Albuquerque Community Foundation. And so once you see the funder's profile being pulled up, you will see in this right-hand corner an IRS filing requirement. And just below that, you'll see tax forms that will show their 990s. So pull up their most recent 990, and on the very first page, you will see in section F the name and address of a principal officer. And that is usually either an executive director or the chief financial officer or the equivalent. Every once in a while, you will see the name of an attorney that might represent that foundation, but it's at least one contact name of somebody that you may be able to sort of make inroads with. But then if you go deeper into the 990 and you get to Part 7, Section A, you will see a list of the officers, directors, trustees, key employees, and the highest compensated employee, right? So once you get to that section, and I know it's going to be hard to see, I'll zoom in a moment, you'll see what looks like this. It's like a list of a bunch of names. There's a bunch of columns. And so this is going to list the entire list of board of trustees or board of directors, as well as usually your executive director, and again, usually your CFO, and then any other highly compensated staff. So if we look at this right here in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see Randall Royster is the president and CEO of the Albuquerque Community Foundation. Marissa Magallanes is the vice president. And then Nicholas Williams, who we saw in that box F earlier, is the CFO, right? So I was right in guessing who that would be. And then up above them, you can see other board members and trustees. So what you want to do is reach out to your board, your staff, your volunteers, your colleagues, and say, hey, who knows the people that are on this list? Can we get them to do a soft introduction to say, hey, we'd like to teach you and help you understand a little bit about what we do and how we serve the community or how we work in this particular sector, right? So also in the 990, you want to look for the Schedule 1. This will tell you the names of the grantees. They have to tell you how much their grants were. That's in this column D. And then usually you will have, even if it's just a couple of words, some kind of quick description of the purpose of the grant. So for some of these were donor advised, and that again is the unsolicited portion of things. But then you can see like one was a Sandia Foundation grant, and this was for human services, right? So you can get a sense of what are they funding and how much are they funding for. So again, you can understand if they're well aligned with what your organization or agency is doing, if this is going to be the right amount of work that you're going to put in. If you see like 250 and 500, 250, 500, and you know it's going to be a lot of work, you may decide that's not worth it. Or you may decide that this is the right organization or foundation for us to partner up with because we really feel like there's some good long-term opportunities, and the amounts don't matter as long as this last column here does align with what you're doing. All right, we've got the next movie. Go ahead and throw in the chat what your guesses are. Yep, I see Richard's got it. Footloose. Very good. So it's Ren, right? Yep. Here we go. So tip number 3 is frequently attend community events. I want you to attend, and I know a lot of us, and I bet, trust me, while I have the fortune of working with many very talented colleagues, I have spent much of my career as the solo grant writer or the solo development person for nonprofit organizations primarily. And I don't have all the time in the world, but as much as you can, you need to be attending community events, or perhaps your board members or your executive directors need to be attending community events and fundraisers that are either for the foundation that you're interested in, or perhaps from the foundation at which they are going to be hosting things. Or you should participate in any opportunities that are offered either in your communities or in your sectors that are open to the general public. Things like volunteer days, grant review panels, community forums. Sometimes they'll do surveys and focus groups, or they'll even do convenings or community sectors and trainings. Anything in which the foundation is going to either be hosting, participating, or otherwise being present at, right? You want to make sure that you are establishing a persistent presence, and this process can be lengthy. Other than the first tip, which is just making a phone call and seeing if they're interested, these tips that I'm going to be giving to you are intended to be used in tandem with each other to develop relationships. And as we know, developing relationships is going to take time. So while you might attend one community event and immediately make that connection, and kudos to you if you do, it may take time of attending several events before either you feel like you have that opportunity to have a good organic conversation with the funders, or maybe make a connection in which you can be introduced to the funders. All right, next movie, go ahead and throw your guesses in the chat. I will admit I have not seen this particular one. I understood it was quite popular back in the late 2000s, right? 2008, I believe. So but I picked this particular scene because my understanding is in this scene, these two star-crossed lovers, Bella and Edward, are trying to make the most of their limited circumstances in which they can interact with each other. So I don't see any guesses, so I'll tell you that this movie is Twilight. So don't come for me. Like I said, I haven't seen this one, and I think it's probably not necessarily going to be a crowd favorite, but that Edward and Bella have just figured out a way how to create or take advantage of environments in which they can be together. And so that is my next tip to you. I want to invite you to engage funders outside of the traditional application process. You need to do the same thing that Edward and Bella are doing, right? You need to create non-fundraising events and invite that foundation staff or their board of directors or perhaps some of their volunteers so that they can learn more about you. You can do this through lunch and learns, through site visits or tours that are open to the general public, or they could be limited invitations to funders or just that funder. And you should consider ways in which you could be doing community convenings as well, or at least attending more community convenings, as I discussed in that last tip. Other things you can do are either sending hard copy annual reports or sometimes email, although you've got to be careful. There are laws that prevent you from just picking an email and spamming somebody. But a hard copy annual report, if you do produce them, might be a good idea. Monthly newsletters could be a way to sort of engage with them in a way that's not a direct ask, but trying to do that hard work of sort of making them aware of who you are. Any kind of front-facing communications, whether maybe sometimes you'll share a success story or it'll be a campaign newsletter that's not necessarily an ask, right? But it's like updating you on what's going on with um, this particular initiative that you have. I was mentioning earlier, I have 3 sons, right? So I'm going to give you an analogy. And this is not true, fortunately, with my sons. But if I had one son who the only time he ever came to me was when he needed something, or the only time he really talked to me or communicated with me or engaged with me was when he was saying, "Hey, mom, can you do this for me? Mom, can you do that for me? Hey, mom, can I have 20 bucks to go to the movies?" Right? Versus if I had a kid who engaged with me all the time and I was developing a relationship with them, and then eventually said, "Hey, mom, can I have like 100 bucks or can I borrow 100 bucks for this thing?" Who am I more likely to give money to, even if there's only a single ask at the end of whatever process? I think we all know the answer is going to be the second son, which is the one that has developed a relationship and I've learned more about them and I understand what their ask is about. And it's not the only thing they're doing or the first thing that they're doing when they're, building a relationship. So again, I want you to remember that this is all about building relationships. Next movie. Any guesses on this one? This one goes back to the last millennium. This one is American Pie. So, tip number 5, I want you to connect with foundations in creative ways. Those are the previous tips I gave you, but the real tip here is don't be a Sherman, right? Most of my tips are about what to do. A couple of my tips are about what not to do, right? Your attempts at engaging, establishing, cultivating relationships must be done over time, as I mentioned, and you need to make sure that you're not doing it in a way in which you are a pest or an annoyance like Sherman. So you can do things like maybe you connect with the program officer of the foundation on LinkedIn or their Facebook page. You have liked it with your organization's Facebook page. And when I say their Facebook page, I mean the foundation's Facebook page. Probably don't try to make a connection to the person's personal Facebook page, right? Um, don't spam them with comments. Don't like every single thing that they're doing, right? You want to, again, engage them in a way that's authentic, like you're building a relationship or with our friendship, right? So think about ways that you can be creative in engaging them, but also make sure that you're using some common sense. You can subscribe to their YouTube channel, right? But you don't have to comment on every single thing. You want to make sure that you're engaging in an appropriate, normal, natural, and organic way, as I mentioned. Next movie, Ducky, right? Anybody remember this one? This one is Pretty in Pink from 1986. So my next tip to you is to try to build authentic, strategic, and transparent partnerships. So I don't want you to try to be pulling any wool over people's eyes with that foundation's existing grantees. Now, this is a tough tip, and sometimes you might meet resistance because we unfortunately are raised with a scarcity mindset as we grow up as fundraisers, whether we're a development manager or exclusively a grant writer, right? There's this idea that there's a limited piece of pie, and if I tell them how I got my piece of pie, then there might not be a piece of pie for me later, right? This sort of scarcity, zero-sum mindset might prevent people from talking about how they built their relationship with the funder, or might prevent them from thinking about how they might collaborate with you in the future on grants with that funder. But I am a high tides raises all ships kind of person. And I think there are ways in which you can build those relationships, especially like I said, if you're transparent, if you go to a colleague that you know has gotten a grant from this funder and you say, hey, man, we've been trying to get into there forever and we just have not had any luck, or we don't know how. A, as we mentioned at the beginning with the poll, how did you get in? Are you willing to share that? And then B, would you be willing to either make a soft introduction to us, to the funder, or would you be interested in possibly collaborating with us on a grant in the future? And the great news about that is a lot of times these existing grantees may not be able to apply for a grant in the next round, right? But they could be a sub-awardee or a partner if you're the applicant. And so here you have a situation in which it's a win-win, right? Not only are they going to lend some credibility to your project because the funder has worked with them in the past and hopefully has a positive viewpoints of them, but also they can continue to receive some funding. And in all likelihood, if you are appropriate to collaborate with each other, you're also probably both working in the funding priority or priorities areas that the funder is particularly interested in, right? So don't be afraid to ask an organization that you know if they would be interested in either drawing you in as a partner, or they would partner with you. And think about this as like, how can we all build and create change in the sector that clearly all three of us are interested in: the existing grantee, the funder, and you. Okay. Next movie. I think this is the only movie in which I have oh my gosh, what's his name? Forgetting his name. Michael Fox, Michael J. Fox. It's the only movie in which I have two actors featured. This one is Teen Wolf. Scott Howard, right? That was the character's name. So tip number 7 is build your brand around what your unique qualities or niche is. And when I say that, I mean the organization or agency for which you work, right? So you need to make sure that you're building your organization and project's brand, not just like the marketing brand, but like, what are we about? What do we do? How are we affecting systematic, change, whether it's systematic, whether it's, short-term stopgap, we need to stop the bleeding, so to speak. Whatever it is that you're doing, you need to make sure that you're building your brand, but you're also talking about what it is that you do that makes you unique, or what approach that you are doing that perhaps others have not tried, but you have found it to be quite successful. How are you a model for others? Because this, in my opinion, and this goes back to the question that we had earlier about how do you get into the Kenzie Scott, right? If you're doing something very unique that is also successful, or at least is creating a lot of lessons learned and starting to develop some new best practices, I guarantee you're going to be talked about with those consulting firms or whoever else that they're talking to get ideas for who should we be possibly engaging with. You say, yeah, there's this new organization that's out in the Lower Hudson area. They're doing this thing. We don't even know yet if it's successful, but it's piqued our interest. It's very interesting. We're very curious to see what the results are. So you need to make sure to communicate how your organization is doing things that's maybe a little bit different, or how your approach has been more successful. And I'm going to say it has been more successful than other approaches, never denigrating others, but like what is your special sauce? What's your secret sauce, right? So if you're going to be appealing in order to nab that date to the grant prom, you really need to show people who your organization truly are. And sometimes that is by grabbing their attention, and that is usually by sharing what makes you unique. Now, that does not mean I want you to go out there and make a spectacle of yourself. But what it does mean is that you need to do an internal assessment of what makes your organization or agency special. I want you to ask yourself questions like, why would a foundation want to court you? What are you doing that is different or innovative that others in your geographic area and or sector aren't doing? And what does your organization or agency bring to the table that is different than some of the current strategies that might not be successful in affecting change? Now, keep in mind, 80% of the funders that said that they would prefer to receive a poorly written request that represented real words and real actions, but successful projects, than an elegantly crafted proposal written by a professional grant writer. And I know that breaks some of our hearts here in this room because we work so hard to make it sure that it's elegantly crafted. And we're not saying that that's not important too. But if it is literally a zero-sum game where it's either elegantly crafted, but not a lot of sort of interest, intrigue, or demonstrated success versus maybe not somebody didn't use spell check and their grammar is perhaps not the best, but it sounds like these are the people down in the trenches doing the real work, and boy, are they finding some real success or finding out some really interesting things that we need to talk about. And so they're more interested in that. Additionally, nearly 2/3 of funders, so about 64% of them that were surveyed, said that it is important that the project represents an innovative idea or approach. So again, I want you to think about what makes you guys different. And if there is nothing different about you, that doesn't mean that this is the end of the line for you. And I'm not saying you need to change, right? But if there is something, that perhaps is a way that you can sort of build those inroads to perhaps have some of those conversations. All right, next movie. I see a question from Diane. It says, when a funder doesn't have a website, suggestions for finding an email address. That's a great question. I will tell you, if they don't have a website, then I would be careful of just straight up emailing. I would be careful of straight up emailing them. Uh, let me back up for a second. If they don't have a website, if there are no collateral materials out there whatsoever that tell you how to contact them, I would actually say don't just randomly email them in that way. That is when you need to use your network to figure out how to make other connections, because usually that would be considered an invasion of privacy if you like stalked them and found their personal, email and then emailed them. They're not interested. If they haven't put their information out there publicly, their contact information out there publicly, then you have to find another way to find that introduction. So hopefully that answers your question, Diane. And the rest of you, yep, you've got it correct. It is Greece. So, tip number 8, don't forget to share your successes and share them publicly. And I know this is actually hard for a lot of us, especially as I mentioned, being introverts, or some of us just feel uncomfortable about the notion of bragging about ourselves. And some people consider sharing successes bragging. But I want you to, I'm going to use another analogy here, right? If you are at a party and you have one person who seems to be the life of the party, right? And I don't mean that in like a obnoxious way, but they're just, people are gravitating towards them. They're telling stories, they're listening to people's stories, they're laughing, they're dancing, they're having fun. And then you also go up to, let's say you're going up to the chips table and you're getting some punch and some chips. And then there's like the wallflower who you just noticed at the party or that you saw sitting in a corner the whole time. You got the wallflower on one side and the life of the party on the other side. Who are you more likely to just randomly strike up a conversation with, right? Now, I know some of us, especially the super introverts like myself, will say the wallflower, the life of the party kind of scares me. But the truth is, most people, and this is true about our funders, are going to gravitate towards the life of the party. They're going to gravitate towards those who are living their best lives, who seem to be, having successes, or maybe they had a challenge, but then they shared their challenge and they shared what they learned about it, right? Those that are willing to put themselves out there to share their successes and also share some of their vulnerabilities are likely to seem the most open to have conversations. And so this is really more of a psychological thing, that the funders are more likely to address those who are sharing their successes and sharing their lessons learned, sharing their challenges, sharing sometimes their research or what they're learning, than they are about those who may be doing excellent work but just aren't really talking about it. So whether or not it was funded by an external source, you need to be sure that you are regularly sharing success stories and your learnings to inform the best practices so that you can also demonstrate and position yourself as a leader in the sector, right? And there are a lot of free ways to do this. You can do this through social media. So you can do it through YouTube, website and blogs. As I mentioned earlier, your monthly newsletter and or annual reports. Oops, excuse me. You can do it with emails, and you can also do it with earned media, where you can get an article in newspaper or you can get TV coverage, which is great, right? So depending on the situation, you might even consider paid media or advertisements. And I find this to be useful, especially if the program, services, or initiative is ongoing and the public would benefit from learning out. So this is not only just a way of sharing your successes, but it's actually communications and outreach. But certainly, if your successes were at all assisted or facilitated with funding, then the funders are usually going to appreciate hearing or seeing those success stories and the acknowledgement of their involvement. If acknowledgement is desired, that should be in your grant agreement. So naturally follow the funders' wishes and guidelines on how they wish to be acknowledged when you are sharing your success stories. And this is particularly important for 3 reasons. The first reason is you should always thank those who helped you get to where you are today. That's just a good old-fashioned principle by which you should be living your life. The second is that it does build credibility for your programs when people see that funders are investing in your program. It gives you street cred, right? And finally, this will be tied into the next tip of why you should be sharing your successes privately or publicly, not privately, sorry. So this is going to be a harder one. It's a more recent movie. I believe it came out in 2020 by director Ryan Murphy. I'm not sure if anybody's going to know this one, so I'll give you all a couple seconds on this. Let's look at the chat. Nope, not seeing any guesses, so I'll go ahead and tell you all. This one is called The Prom. So tip number 9 is that you need to consider how you can become a leader, one of the leaders at least, in your sector through advocacy and through research. So the more that you can demonstrate that you are a thought leader or that you are a leading actionable agent in your geographic area and or sector, the more credibility you will have with others, including funders. So I want you to engage in advocacy in the appropriate settings. Now, remember, I've cited several surveys and research papers, and I want to harken back to the 2015 Foundation Source survey that revealed that 72% said it was important that the organizations with which they were going to be doing funding had a strong reputation. So this is why this tip and the last tip is very important for you to share your successes and also be perceived as a leader in your area, right? Additionally, 76% of funders said it was important to demonstrate significant subject matter expertise in the proposed area of funding. So that's why some of the earlier tips talked about maybe you guys create your own community convenings. And maybe you don't have any way to reach that funder, but you just start hosting meetings where you bring in others in your geographic area and or your sector, and you go, okay, what are we facing? What are you seeing? What are our best practices? Where are our needs? What can we do to instill better practices? How can we address the crux of the issue as opposed to just dealing with some of the symptoms, right? If you are leading those conversations, those activities, those initiatives, or if you're a part of that team that is leading those things, you're more likely to get funding. You want to make sure that that foundation wants to partner with you because you are authentically demonstrating that you have reliability, you're innovative, you have efficacious approaches, and of course that you have passion for your field of work. Next movie, again, harkens back to the last millennium. This one is 10 Things I Hate About You from 1999. And this next tip that I'm going to give you, I think, is usually an aha moment for most people, which is kind of funny because it should be the first thing we realize. But I think we get so ingrained in the idea of competition that we forget that that foundation wants to go to the prom too. Okay. You're not the only one looking for a prom date. And they may even want to go to the prom with you. every time I have this conversation with clients, or every time I'm doing this training, participants always think, oh man, that's right. You forget because you're always thinking I'm the one trying to get into the concert, but really you're both looking to go to the prom, right? And I want to reassure those who may have a little bit of anxiety, nervousness, stress, or even trepidation about possibly approaching a foundation or trying to build a relationship, because the fact is the foundation was created to affect change. Your organization or agency was created to affect change. You both want change. So when you realize that you're on the same team, you're just playing different roles, that tends to take away some of those power dynamics and some of the fear and nervousness that we have about approaching foundations. So I really want to make you think about this particular tip, or even I should say less than a tip, but more so a reminder, because it always seems like an epiphany when I say it, but it's so very simple and so plain. Remember, these foundations want to give their money out. They have to actually give their money out. They want to affect change with those that they think will be their best partners. They want to have an impact just like you do. And they also want to build relationships that will inspire them, that will excite them, that will help them do new great things, and maybe even teach them a few new dance moves, right? All right, we're getting into some of the last couple of tips. I only recently, I never saw this original movie, but I only recently saw the musical, and I finally understand the pop culture interest in this particular movie and why so many people relate usually to one or more of these particular characters. This one is Mean Girls from 2004. And this is one of the tips that I'm going to give you, which is don't do this, right? Do not criticize or complain about no answers or rejections, or if you simply just can't reach somebody, right? Like, oh man, I've been trying forever. What's with that organization or that foundation? They don't let anybody in, right? So let's be clear about one thing. And I say this because I have worked for foundations. I worked for um, the Greater Fort Wayne Community Foundation. And also I have been a reviewer for foundations. No foundation owes you anything. Unless otherwise dictated by their bylaws, they are not obligated to entertain your ideas or proposals for funding. They have the right to give their money to whom they want. And I applaud that right. It's their money, collectively or otherwise, and they have the right to decide how to disperse it. But I also want to encourage you to have some empathy, and I want us to hearken back to the many reasons why a foundation might say no unsolicited proposals. Remember that early slide where we talked about a funder may have limited capacity. A funder may desire to vet or pre-screen because they want it to be a pressure-free environment. So they only have a few staff and they hate saying no too, right? A funder may prefer to do their own due diligence, or they have limited time in which to deploy the funds, or they just maybe want to make decisions at their own whim, and that's okay too. We need to have real sympathy, empathy, and appreciation, whether we are selected or not, for the challenges that are facing these foundations. But I also want to say here, this isn't just about like having empathy for the foundations. The practical tip here is never complain or criticize, because even if it's public, even if it's a private complaint, um, because the foundations hear it. I was so surprised when I started working with foundations, either as clients, working directly for them, or doing reviews for them, to find out how much gossip they knew about their field. And I thought, well, I'm glad I was never one of those gossipers, because I was shocked to hear how well that foundation had their ear to the ground, and they sort of knew where all the players were, they knew where all the troublemakers were, and they knew where all the critics of not necessarily that foundation, but like critical about this approach or critical about what's happening in the city or whatever. They knew what was going on. So don't think, oh, well, it was just a couple of colleagues and I sitting around and complaining about things, because whether it's ill-intended or not, and whether it's a scarcity mindset thing, or if somebody just makes a casual comment that they're not thinking anything about, a lot of the times criticisms do get back to the foundations, and you don't ever want to put yourself, clearly not your organization or agency, in that position. So Okay. This is a fun scene from a great movie. That's pretty lighthearted and fun. Does anybody know which one this one is? Yeah, Susan, you got it. Romeo and Michelle, correct. Yep, very good. So the next tip is I want you to be grateful for the existing support that you have. Now, there are two meanings and two ways to interpret this tip. The first is my own sort of hippy dippy woo woo kind of way. I want to encourage you to be genuinely grateful for the existing funders that you have or have had in the past. And I want you to consider how you can build and cultivate those existing relationships. We sometimes forget about those things, right? So whether or not the funding is there, or whether or not it's a year after year situation, I want you to make sure that you are grateful for and building your existing relationships. And there's some real value in this, regardless of whether or not there's an immediate financial payout. But the second way, or second sort of interpretation to this tip, which also ties back to tip number 8, is that at every opportunity, you should be acknowledging your existing funders or your existing support, right? I want you to make sure that you're celebrating them, you're acknowledging them when and where appropriate as they wish to be acknowledged. And if potential new funders are not seeing you acknowledge your existing partners, and if this is important to the foundation itself, then why would they want to partner up with you if they don't even see you being appreciative for what you already do have? Think about this. Almost always a foundation is in the private realm is named after somebody, and often it's somebody that has passed, right? Or they're named after a family. It's because they want to celebrate that person, that couple, or that family and their legacy. So when you create a foundation in the name or honor of, they're trying to build that legacy of not only what they did in their lifetimes, but also afterwards, right? So they want to make sure that they are going to feel appreciated and that they will be celebrated publicly. Now, some foundations do want that anonymity, and that's totally okay, right? Some board members want to be totally anonymous. They don't want to see their foundation names, or certainly not their names out there, and you have to honor that too. But most foundations have one or more namesakes, and so they usually are quite interested in having their names on the walls of places or in articles or at the end of a report, right? They want to see that their legacy is that goes on.
Tonia and everyone. Tonia is doing such a good job and she's got so many great tips. I just want to recognize that it is 101. If you have to jump off, I will send you the recording so you will get to watch the rest. If you can stay with us, Tonia, I hope you can stay with us. I hope everyone can stay with us for a few extra minutes to finish up. I know there's a few more excellent tips. I've been jotting down notes here, so thank you. And please continue.
Yep, I have one last bonus tip and then I'll be happy to take any questions. So this is the bonus tip, right? This one's from Clueless, 1995. And the bonus tip is sometimes it's better to go to the prom without them. Now, listen, if you've done your best to try to reach out and make connections to that foundation, and if they want to just not respond to any of those requests, I want to give you the same advice that I would give to my friends. If you've thrown yourself at them over and over again, and they're just not showing any interest, stop wasting your time, right? And sometimes it's just that you're not a good match. Whether you think you're a good match, maybe they know things that you don't. Sometimes there's some things about the potential prom date that may not be a suitable alignment for you. And if your dream date cannot appreciate you, do you really want to go to the prom with them, right? You got to kind of think about that. So understand that I'm not trashing any foundation or any organization. Oops, sorry. But yeah, sometimes it's just better to go on with them. So yeah, here I am, happy to answer any questions that you all have. And you can either type them in the chat, or if you want to take yourselves off of mute, you can do that, or raise your hand and we'll call on you.
I have a question.
Yes, Lisa.
Has the reporting requirements changed for 990s? Because I don't always see a list of organizations that a foundation has given money to.
So I've heard this a couple times in some recent trainings, and no, they have not changed. There are some though that are practicing redacting out names or simply not listing, and that's actually against the IRS rules, but there's no penalty to not doing it, really, right? I mean, over and over again, over years, the IRS could come back and slap you on the wrist, but there's no penalty to it. So if they are not listing their things, that is an indicator that they may not want to be contacted, and they really want that privacy. So that's unfortunately the answer in that case is a lot of times, but most of the time I'm able to find a lot of information about my funders, and I've never personally come across a redacted or otherwise limited in view 990. Thank you, Molly.
Thanks.
Richard had a question.
Yeah, I had two different questions. One is, I know donor advised funds have become quite popular of late.
Yeah.
This was great advice. Should we take similar approaches if we want to target donor advised funds, or are they a totally different beast?
They are a different beast, but some of these same principles are still going to apply. And I believe I actually referred Michelle and Deborah to a fantastic trainer in donor advised funds. So hopefully you can bring them in too. But I will tell you some of the things that I learned from her, and also my experience is usually what you want to do with the donor advice funds is you want to either make friends with the program officer at the foundation that is holding the donor advice fund. So a lot of times that's your community foundations. Sometimes it's your United Ways, or make friends with the bankers who are the trustees for those various donor advised funds. So once, and I say make friends with, I don't necessarily mean like literally going out to lunch with them, but like, hey, just want to let you know what we do, what we serve, etc. And one of the great things actually goes back to the Albuquerque Community Foundations is the Albuquerque Community Foundation, and I've heard this is happening with many other community foundations or similar foundations. When they can't fund your project, they're taking the projects that they can't fund and they're trying to see if they can match. They're playing matchmaker with their donor advised funds. So they're saying, hey, we weren't able to fund them, but we saw this great organization that seems to be interested or seems to be doing the things that you're interested in. So please consider how you might, match up with them. And if you want an introduction, we're more than happy to make those introductions. And I've had several clients that got random, unexpected letters from donor advised funds because they applied through the community foundation, and that reference was made. So.
The second question I had, the importance of finding people that's on your board and seeing the network, if they know anyone at the foundation, is really critical. And I've had limited experience, but I know LinkedIn can be a great tool of trying to find who knows who. But it can be haphazard. And there was one time when I was doing it, and some of the board members really kind of closed off. I think they have an option of kind of not sharing who they're connected with. Yeah. But are there workshops that LinkedIn offers to really utilize that function? Like, I know the function exists, but I'm not really clear on how to use it as efficiently as possible. I'm just curious about your experience.
I don't know enough about, I'm on LinkedIn and I try to be active on it, but I don't know enough about LinkedIn to tell you what they do offer. Mm-hmm. But what I can say is LinkedIn is great because a lot of times it'll share like mutual connections. And so you could go to a foundation and see like these people like them, or these people have mutual connections to the program officer, and then perhaps you can make connections in that way. And that's how I have done it, or my clients have done that in the past. Mm-hmm. But really, I would also gently encourage you to gently encourage your board members that they are there to help serve and advance the needs and interests and the long-term sustainability of your organization or agency. And so while they don't necessarily have to open up their Rolodex to you, it really is their responsibility to try to make those connections. And that's maybe a conversation that is very gently had by the executive director with the board, maybe not our roles as grant writers to do that. And sometimes even bringing in an external client account consultant to talk to and educate your board about how they can play a role in your development processes, whether it's grant writing or otherwise. A lot of board members are just as shy about fundraising as most people who are not in this field are. So
thank you.
Yep.
Do we have any other questions before we close?
The only thing I have for people is if you all would indulge me in my poll of how confident are you feeling now about the possibility of moving forward with an application, or not application, a relationship building with funders that say no unsolicited proposals on a scale of 1 to 10, from least confident to 10 being, I feel like I can nail this one. I'd love to see if people would throw that in the chat. Went from a 6 to 8. Great, Deborah. Ooh, a couple more 8s. That's great. I love seeing that. I'm glad that this was effective and helpful to you. So you're not going to get a copy of the PowerPoint because it's really just a lot of movie stills. But what I did do is kind of put all of my tips together into a tip sheet for you. It also has information. I think I have all the studies that I cited is also listed on there. And then there's some more information about some trainings that we offer through the grant plan. So thank you all.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Tonia. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
And thanks for sharing your time, giving us your time and your expertise.
All right.
So, as Tonia noted, we will be in touch and send her handout. And we will share the program recording and a brief survey with everybody. We look forward to seeing everybody at upcoming programs. And for members, our next Connections call is on February 13th at 9:30 a.m. And once again, that's a good time for Q&A and sharing intel and asking for help. We hope to see you again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.